Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to read to you chapter 16 from my second book, Seven Sisters Overland. At 7:30 sharp, Captain Belt was ready to take his place beside the Black Bell and proceed with the challenge of the infamous Lexington Bend. Since his announcement about it yesterday, the word had spread up and down the levee and gotten out to some of the Lexington residents, who went to the town's edge and climbed atop the bluff to watch the steamer attempt to round the bend. He lit a brand new cigar and puffed it triumphantly as he looked through his cabin windows and noticed people gathering on the bluff and along the levee. Yesterday he had proven he was invincible as a competitor, and today he would prove to everyone watching that he had superior navigational skills as well. He knew what kind of power the Saluda needed in order to make it around the bend. And he knew by the sound and feel of the ship's response yesterday that the Saluda didn't have sufficient power to accomplish that task. That is why he had to stop for repairs in Lexington. But now his audience awaited him. He would give them the exhibition they so much desired. Stepping out of his cabin and to the bell caused clapping and cheering from the spectators. He acknowledged his audience with a salute in their direction. He wondered how many of his fellow captains were watching him from the decks of their docked steamers. He wanted to show off with a fine burst of speed as the boat left the port. He went through the series of checks with his crew, to which they answered aye. The commands were starting to stir passengers on the forward deck from their slumber, but it wasn't as loud for the saints at the stern of the ship, and many slept on. He gave the order for the levee workers on the dock to cast off the lines, and 8 deckhands on the port side rail began taking in the lines hand over hand and wrapping them securely around the capstans. Other crewmen were in position to push the Saluda out into the river with long poles. President Smoot had a clear view of the Saluda as he stood on the levee talking to Captain Miller. If what you've told me is true, Mr. Smoot, Captain Belt, Captain Belt is foolhardy to attempt the bend with that relic. A shower of sweat instantly covered Smoot's body. He became nauseated. What if he had been wrong to advise Tippets to stay with the Saluda? He silently began to pray as his stomach started to cramp. When the boat was 30 feet away from the shore and turned in the right direction, Captain Belt continued giving his orders. "Fill the boilers to maximum pressure." His first mate repeated the command. He looked down the levee toward the Isabel, took the cigar he was nursing from his lips, and waved his hand up high to get Captain Miller's attention. Then he announced loudly, "I will round the point this morning, or blow this boat to hell trying." His remark brought whoops and cheers from all who heard it. "I've never met a man who thought more highly of himself," said Captain Miller, chuckling. "He's like a cock who thinks the sun has risen just to hear him crow." Ao agreed, laughing nervously. With maximum heat and full pressure, the boiler walls of the Saluda burned hot. Captain Belt rang the big black bell. "Full speed ahead," he yelled as he stuffed his cigar back into his mouth. The engine roared its loud startup and forced water into the boilers. The side wheels started to churn, but before the paddle wheels made 3 revolutions, 2 huge consecutive thunderclaps sounded, which rattled houses and shook windows all along the levee. But the thunderclaps weren't from a rainstorm. The ancient boilers below deck had stunningly blown up the front 2/3 of the Saluda, causing steam, iron, and timber to shoot through the air in all directions. Screams followed, and then chaos. People on the bluff saw the pilot house with the pilots Labarge and Gouret blow higher than the bluff they were standing on. Scores of human beings were blown into the river. From 200 yards away, A.O. felt the concussion from the blast and witnessed parts of the 2 tall chimneys, foredeck, cabin section, and boilers flying in every direction. "Dear God," he exclaimed. Then he bent over and threw up repeatedly. His heart seemed to fail him. He looked back at the scene in disbelief. Then some unseen force gave him a shove forward, and he yelled, "Let's go, Captain Miller." The 2 started running full steam toward the Saluda. Others came running from the levee and the bluff. As they all got closer, they could see wounded and dead bodies on the levee, on the opposite shore, in the middle of the river, everywhere. There was a cloud of steam, splinters, and dust filtering down from the sky. The flying timber fell on the roustabout. A flying timber fell on the roustabout who untied the moorings just seconds earlier. It killed him outright. Part of a boiler crashed through a warehouse on the levee and demolished it. The other boiler rained down large chunks of metal everywhere. Captain Belt, who was perched on the hurricane roof, was blown halfway up a steep embankment along with his cigar and his heavy cast iron bell. His death was instantaneous. Most of the boat's structure above the boilers and forward of the paddle wheels was demolished. Groans, shrieks, sobs, and plaintive wailing from passengers filled the air. The noise of the explosion had awakened everyone for miles around the levee. Hundreds of Lexington citizens ran from their homes and surged onto the levee. None were standing and watching. Everyone was focused on the rescue and recovery of the Saluda crew and passengers. Each rescuer went to work on the victim in front of him. Lexington's town fathers were soon in the middle of everything. "Bring the dead to the wharf, and we'll lay them out for identification," one councilman directed. "Take the wounded to the levee warehouse. We'll set up a makeshift hospital there," ordered Dr. Arnold, the town doctor, "and have someone send a telegram to Brunswick and implore their doctors and nurses to come and help." "Ladies," yelled the mayor's wife to the women who were standing ready to help, "round up the children who can't find their parents and stay with them in the levee office." Captain Miller soon saw where he could help. He ordered his Isabel crew and the workmen from the dock into the tied-up dinghies on the wharf so they could paddle out and rescue those in the water, dead or alive. Some who were little hurt swam against the current to the shore, while others clung to timbers in the river and drifted downstream, yelling for help and hoping someone would fish them out. The two men dragged one man's lifeless body from the water and let it lie on the shore, while they looked for others with more signs of life. After a few minutes, an English sheepdog, dragging a leash, came and began sniffing and nudging the body. The man started to stir. He pulled himself up on his elbows, shook his head, and looked up to receive an eager tongue licking his face. "Buster, old chap, what happened?" He caught Buster's leash and began to scratch his faithful dog's neck and head. Then he tried to bring himself up into a sitting position. He groaned loudly from the pain in his knee. He touched his head where it hurt and looked at his hand. It was covered with blood. He couldn't remember anything. Then as he looked around at the scene, it came to him. The Saluda had blown up, and he and Buster had somehow escaped the blast. "Where's Benji?" he asked, knowing Buster couldn't answer. Buster started to whimper mournfully and moved back and forth with agitation. Sir Evelyn sensed Benji hadn't made it. He clung on to Buster. "It'll be all right, old boy. It's just you and me now." "Hey, are you all right, mister?" said a townswoman who was running past and noticed the reunion. "I have some cuts on my head and my knee hurts like the dickens, but I think I can walk." "Get yourself over to the warehouse right there and get some doctoring," she said, pointing to the temporary hospital. "Thank you, madam," he said gratefully, as he cautiously got up to a standing position and limped over to the warehouse with Buster at his side. There were scores of mangled bodies scattered all over the wharf and on the nearby banks. Everyone was trying to account for their loved ones. Wives and mothers were frantically looking for husbands and children. Husbands and bereaved orphans engaged in searching among the dead and dying for their wives and parents. There was extreme sadness for those who found their loved ones dead, and extreme joy for those who were reunited with their missing loved ones. Rescue workers were crying as they tried to help the injured victims. Some just held the hands of those who were beyond help, trying to comfort them before they passed away. Human blood mingled with the water of the river made it even a gorier sight. A crew of men from the levee was now on board to see if they could find anyone alive underneath the rubble of the top two decks, which had collapsed on sleeping passengers and firemen below. They dug as fast as they could, tossing the debris into the river as they went. The rescuers pulled several dead bodies out of the main rubble before they could get to a screaming man who was delirious with pain. Josiah Clancy, the second engineer in charge of the boilers, was ranting between cries of agony. "It was my fault. It was all my fault. I was determined to have enough steam to force the boat around the bend. When Belt gave the full steam ahead, I opened the valves, and the cold water came in. She blew. I forgot I had shut the water out of the boilers last night when we were repairing the damaged valve. The boilers were searing red hot with no water inside. It was all my fault." He moaned and groaned mightily as two men tried to carefully remove him from the rubble. He had been scalded so badly that his skin hung like gauze from his face, neck, and chest. One arm was blown off almost to the shoulder, and the other was lacerated to the bone and hung lifelessly by his side. His legs were broken in several places, and he had cuts and abrasions everywhere. Thankfully, he passed out. They could now move him much faster to the rescue boat. When they placed him in the dinghy, one rescuer shook his head. "There's no way he can live with all these injuries. He won't even make it to the shore." "I'm afraid he's a goner," said the other. It was hard for these big burly men not to become emotionally involved. "Come on," said the first, wiping his eyes with the back of his hands. "Let's leave him and get back and see if we can save someone else before she goes down." The men worked tirelessly and saw sights that sickened them, but they kept searching. They knew the ship wouldn't stay afloat much longer. "Quiet, everyone. Do you hear that?" All the workers on deck stopped to listen. It was hard distinguishing a single cry from the cries of the many injured who were on the levee waiting for transport to the infirmary. "I think we've got someone alive down in here." He continued in haste, tossing the wreckage over the side. Finally, they moved a piece of plaster and could see down into a crevice that had been sheltered from the falling rubble by a beam that crossed the entire opening. They could see something moving. "We've got a small child down here." Two mothers who were watching the effort stepped closer. Both were praying that this was their missing child. They didn't know each other, but they clung tightly to each other in hope. The men worked faster to clear the beam from the opening. There in the little space below was a toddler who was sobbing profusely. Four men grabbed onto the beam and lifted it up until it could be caught by several more men and sent to the bottom of the river. A little dust-covered girl was pulled from the mass of ruins. She appeared unhurt. The rescuers brushed her off. The mothers were hopeful. One darted forward. "Emmeline, you're alive," she cried, grabbing her daughter and hugging her tightly. Hope sank for the other mother. The baby stopped her plaintive crying, and her dirty face lit up with a smile. "Mama, Mama!" Everyone indulged in a few seconds of joyful, spontaneous clapping, and then they went back to trying to find more bodies. The other mother held her skirt to her mouth and sobbed broken-heartedly. She couldn't give up hope. She had to believe she would find her daughter too, but she knew in her heart there was little chance of finding her alive under the collapsed rubble. As the urgency of the search on the front part of the deck continued, it dawned on A.O. that no one, as yet, was assisting with the rescue of the saints at the back of the ship. When 2 of the dozen dinghies arrived back on shore with the bodies retrieved from digging through the wreckage, he was exasperated. "Men, why haven't you started retrieving the passengers at the stern?" "We didn't see anyone back there, just stacked luggage, so we thought there wasn't anyone to rescue." "Oh, they are there all right. Let's go." The 2 dinghies were quickly paddled to the back of the Saluda. A.O. began calling loudly. "John Harvey Tippets, are you alive? Are you all right?" He could see several of the saints starting to stand up. He kept calling. Finally, he saw President Tippett stumble to the railing. He had blood trickling down his face. "President Smoot, I was wrong," he sobbed. "I should have listened. I should have listened." A.O. could see that the back of the ship was sinking at a steady rate. "We've got bigger things to worry about, Harvey. Get your people ready to load the dinghies. This steamer is going down." President Tippett felt like someone slapped him across the face. He instantly awoke from his self-pity and started barking orders. "Brothers and sisters, wake up! Get up! We need the uninjured passengers to load the dinghies with the children and the wounded first. The dead can wait. Brother Devereaux, are you and your sons able to assist?" "We are, President," said Thomas. President Tippett started looking around. Those who were moving appeared to be in a daze. Fortunately, the Saluda was only 30 or so yards away from the levee, so the dinghies made quick times back and forth to the shore. As he worked, his mind kept trying to sort out the devastating scene before him. Then it occurred to him as the explosion could have done so much more damage than it did to his company. Yes, there were some dead and some wounded, but not as many as one would expect from the explosion of this magnitude. On the whole, they had been blessed by the Lord, A scripture kept running through his head. I will show unto you the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen, because of their faith, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance. He had never seen a group with as much faith as his company. He started to count the tender mercies they had received through their faith. Being relegated to the third-class passenger deck at the stern of the ship was the best place the saints could have been located during the explosion. The boilers were under the bow of the ship, and most of the wreckage that blasted into the air fell on the front two-thirds of the ship or over the sides. And because there was no room for their luggage in the hold, the saints were forced to stack a wall of their luggage around the outside of the third-class quarters on deck, which ended up acting as somewhat of a barrier to flying debris. All the baggage in the hold had to have been blown to Kingdom Come because it was so close to the center of the explosion. But the saints on the stern might actually be able to save some of theirs before the steamer went down. And it was also fortunate the explosion occurred so close to the levee and not down the river away from civilization. President Tippett's eyes filled with tears as he silently thanked the Lord. Wiping his eyes and trying to stay strong, he was elated to see Sister Wise walking toward him, seemingly uninjured, but with panic written on her face. President, I can't find Alinda May. What? Where's the baby? He was under a quilt when the blast woke us up, but she is nowhere to be seen. President Tippett weighed the situation and then said with regret, I'm very sorry, Sister Wise. I would really like to help you, but I just can't right now. You are going to have to get your sister to help you search for her. I've got to keep this evacuation going. Please hurry. You don't have much time before we have to insist that you all go ashore. Let me know if you find her. Eleanor felt paralyzed, but forced her body to move. She made her way back to her sisters to find Lavinia holding Lanny and singing softly in his ear to calm him down. Susanna was also trying to quiet the twins, who were crying copious tears because of their injuries. Who can come with me to look for Alinda May? Susanna was trying to hold back her own tears. Phoebe and Fanny have all these cuts. What should I do? She said as she dabbed at the blood that was on their face and arms. Eleanor rushed to the twins and gave them a quick examination. These cuts are pretty deep. Take them to the infirmary as soon as possible, Susanna. They probably need stitches. Lavinia, take Lanny to the shore and wait for us there. In the meantime, I've got to find Alinda May. I can come with you, said Caroline. Jane surprisedly spoke up. I'll come too, since Hugh is helping with the evacuation. All right, good. Now, I don't think she is here in our sleeping area. I've already looked it over a couple of times. I think she must have wandered up front to the water closet or to the provision box. As the three moved outside of the wall of luggage, the debris on the deck multiplied twofold, then three. Are you thinking what I'm thinking, sisters? Said Eleanor. I think our luggage wall protected us from this blast. I think you are right, said Caroline. Jane was suddenly heartsick as she looked at the rubble. If Alinda May made it this far, she has to be dead. Let's not give up hope yet, Jane, encouraged Eleanor. Let's keep looking. It was very difficult for the sisters in their long skirts to maneuver the piles of rubble that congested the once bare deck and stairs. They scanned every inch with their eyes as they made their way up the highest point of the debris. Suddenly, Caroline gave a little yelp. Oh, my! It's a body, she said, carefully lifting a piece of timber. The other two came closer. The body was so covered with dust and plaster that she couldn't recognize the clothing at all. With her lips quivering, Jane ventured, Is it Alinda May? Eleanor carefully turned the body over and brushed off her face. She was fearful to look, but forced herself. It's not her, she said in relief. Then she felt a stab of remorse in her stomach for not feeling more sorrow for this poor woman lying before her, who was someone's sweet loved one. She pushed these thoughts aside. We need to keep searching, sisters. They moved away from the body and made their way toward the place where the explosion originated. They looked down into the crater of rubble to see determined men removing body and body parts they could find. Removing every body and body parts they could find. One rescuer spotted the sisters. Hey, you ladies, better not come any farther. That flooring is unstable. It could give way any second. Have you found any females under the debris? Yelled Jane. About 6 or 7 so far. They've already been taken off the boat to the morgue or to the hospital. Only one of them was alive, but she couldn't speak English. The sisters' hearts leaped. "She's in the infirmary," said Caroline. Eleanor was ecstatic. "What do you say we get back to our bags and get off this ship?" As they started to leave, Caroline turned back and called down to the workers. "Good sirs, there is one more female body up here." "Thank you, miss. We'll send someone up for her." The sisters eagerly climbed back over the debris as fast as they dared, trying not to fall or twist their ankles. Eleanor ran to President Tippets. "President, we have hope that Alinda May is alive and in the hospital." "That's wonderful news. You three get your handheld bags, and we'll put you in the next dinghy to shore. Your sisters are already there." By now, the priesthood leaders had taken all the saints they could find, both living and dead, off the Saluda. George took over after President Tippets left the ship. "Brethren, let's get as much of this luggage off as we can before this miserable wreck sinks completely." The men were now racing against time, trying to save the luggage. They could handle it a lot rougher than they could the victims. They formed a line of men and tossed the lighter pieces from one to the other, which filled the dinghies quickly. The trunks were a two-man job. After they made several trips to the shore, the ship started making groaning noises, which caused the men to speed up their work. But when they heard a loud cracking noise, the order to evacuate was given. "Get off the ship! Get off the ship, everyone! She's going down!" The luggage handlers at the stern and the rescuers at the front of the ship started to scramble. They knew the suction of the ship might pull them down with it when it went under. Everyone on shore was yelling frantically, "Jump! Jump!" There was no time to dally. The men responded by leaping or diving out as far as they could from the ship. Then they swam for all they were worth to escape the downward pull of the ship. Thankfully, this part ended well for them, as they managed to get far enough away to turn and see the Saluda disappear under the floating debris. She had sunk in less than 20 minutes' time from the explosion. It was a haunting scene, which very few ever witness. Sorrow and anguish were everywhere. The saints of the Saluda huddled on the wharf, mourning and comforting each other. President Tippets went from family to family, consoling them as they waited for news of their loved ones. With the ship gone, it was almost as if it hadn't happened. But when the saints looked around and saw the dead bodies lying on the wharf, they knew it had. Making it doubly tragic were 16 babies, all under the age of a year, laid out side by side with mourning family members beside them. The scent was horrific. President Smoot finally joined President Tippets on the wharf, and after talking together for a few minutes, President Smoot addressed the saints. "Brothers and sisters, if you need medical attention, please go to the hospital. If you are all right and can continue your journey, Captain Miller has kindly offered to take you the rest of the way to Omaha on the Isabel, free of charge. He will depart in 3 hours." This brought sobs of joy and tears of gratitude from the saints. That's the end of chapter 16. Over and out.